Hey, so we are now starting again. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Aaron Wiess. As many of you guys know, Aaron is an alum of PCC. He got his master's here in 2006, and right now he's a doctoral student in the Asian and Comparative Studies program, SCIS. And Aaron's talk today is titled Tantra, Yoginis, Mandalas, and the Spiritual Logic of Late Capitalism. So without further ado, Aaron.
Hi. Thanks for braving the weather to join me here. You know, I would enjoy Esalen so much more if there was some place that I could, like just soak in some warm water to kind of get over this chill that I have this morning. So Robert, could you work on that for me? Okay. So I've come today to basically do some show and tell for you about some stuff that I find really interesting. My structure here is a little loose. It's basically the title. That's what I've got for you. I have some images that will hopefully keep me on track, but I'd also like to hear from you, questions, protests, and all that. So I know probably the reason you're here is because of this phrase, the spiritual logic of late capitalism, which I didn't invent. I tried to put that in quotes. Anyway, that's a term from a guy named Hugh Urban, who you all should know about. He is a professor at Ohio State for the time being, who specializes in South Asian religion, especially Tantra, and its modern sort of appropriation in American and European contexts. And some of you may recognize this term, logic of late capitalism, from Frederick Jameson, the great literary critic and Marxist theorist, also from Ohio, actually, who described, he had a book called Postmodernism, The Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism. And so I want to give a quick context for that, because that's the context of my presentation of Tantra here, or my raising the question of Tantra, okay? So Shannon brought up late capitalism towards the end of the last discussion. That term was developed by Marxists starting in the 1920s, and there's a guy named, I think, Ernst Mandel, who was important for Jameson, who talked about late capitalism as a stage in the development of this form of society in which finance capital starts to fully pervade society, getting into the most intimate and personal dimensions of being in the world, such that everything is capitalized, everything is marketed. It's the most profound sort of capitalization of culture itself. And so his claim is that far from it being a kind of post-industrial stage, it's the total industrialization of all forms of human being in the world, okay? So that's what we mean by late capitalism. Now, Frederick Jameson expanded on this concept to talk about, well, what is the cultural form that attends to this social structure? He referred to it as postmodernism, which is, I'm going to give a very quick and dirty presentation of it by juxtaposing a couple of images for you. This first one is pretty famous painting by Van Gogh. Maybe you've seen it before. I think the title is just A Pair of Shoes. Much has been made of this painting, perhaps most famously by Martin Heidegger in his work, The Origins of the Work of Art. He did a pretty spectacular analysis of this. But the point being here, I want you to look at these shoes. Now, this painting is not right. I mean, it's a pair of shoes, but it sort of exudes a certain presence, right? Do you feel that? Maybe not. But the idea is that this bespeaks an entire world, an entire sort of, even a cosmology, you could say. I mean, Heidegger, for his part, wanted to locate these shoes at the intersection of earth, sky, mortals, and gods. And so for him, these shoes evoked the moisture of the soil that provides the lifeblood essence of the farming way of life. So you can see this painting has this kind of deep hermeneutical significance. It's an image of a tiny detail of life that evokes the whole of it. You can feel the moisture, you can feel the wholesomeness, the tradition, etc. That's a kind of Heideggerian read on it. And so the point that I'm making is not Heideggerian, it's hermeneutical, okay? So this image bespeaks a whole cosmos of meaning. Now I want to juxtapose that with Andy Warhol's painting here. I think this is called Diamond Dust Shoes. And here we have... Now, again, I'm repeating Jameson here. I got this juxtaposition of paintings from him. He wants to contrast the two by saying that here there is no vast universe of meaning that is implied by this. It's just simple shoes arranged like so many turnips, sort of meaninglessly. That's his phrase. So many turnips, and it's hard to know. I mean, is this evocative, kind of like the piles of shoes at Holocaust memorials, or is it what is it? It doesn't. It's not evoking anything. And furthermore, Jameson shows the difference between these approaches as indicating this increased commercialization. Again, this is an example of the cultural logic of late capitalism. Okay, so I've talked about this for far too long. I want to get into the spiritual logic of late capitalism and Tantra's place in it. So, what do you think of when you think of Tantra? Sex, right? Yes. Okay, so I want to raise the question of why that is. That is not necessarily out of some actual exposure to medieval Indian Tantra. There's a whole history as to why it is that Tantra and sex have become synonymous in our minds. There are other concepts that are probably familiar to you in the universe of Tantra. This is a good example here, the system of chakras and the concept of Kundalini. This is a pretty typical way of diagramming chakras. I found this pretty easily on the internet. On a website that is just entirely New Age and could be anything. It's basically, it could be exchanged for any other New Age website, frankly. And you see this system of diagrams of petals and flowers and colors and themes. This is pretty popular, pretty standard. Maybe some of you are practicing in this kind of way or whatever. This system, this way of organizing the chakras, does have an Indian pedigree. I think it's the Mahanirvana Tantra. Provides a set of 7 chakras with these kind of floral forms and maybe even those colors. And that Tantra was translated and commented upon by a guy named John Woodruff, a.k.a. Arthur Avalon, in the 19th century. And he was one of the first scholars in the West to take Tantra seriously as an actual spiritual tradition. The Victorian scholarship on Tantra was pretty universally scornful of the material and saw Tantra as a kind of decadent stage of Hinduism in which the purity of the Vedas and the Upanishads was basically lost to just a sheer licentiousness and a kind of, there's a kind of racism underlying this interpretation because Tantra is often associated with sort of non-Aryan indigenous South Asian traditions. But then John Woodruff wanted to sort of bring Tantra into polite conversation by saying, no, it's actually the essence of the Vedas and the Upanishads. He gives us this kind of breakdown, okay? And so this is kind of getting to the beginnings of Western arguments about Tantra, which strangely don't really connect all that much with how Indians have been talking about Tantra for many centuries before. Here's a way in the 19th century that a yogi painted this system of energy centers in the body. This was commissioned by a British, I don't know, some kind of British administrator. And then here's another example that is, well, I would show you the full painting, but this is what we're getting. So anyway, I'm just showing you these alternate things. Tantra is not a unified concept necessarily. In fact, the word Tantra is quite contested and means a lot of things. And there is no such thing as Tantrism indigenously in India. Tantrism is a Western concept, and that's important to think about as we proceed. Now, I need to be kind of galloping through this material here. I want to give you a little bit of context by sharing some cultural and historical material to kind of get you thinking a little bit, okay? Something that's important to remember, I think, when thinking about India or South Asia generally, is the locative nature of the spiritual traditions that come from these places. Locative meaning sort of place-oriented, located. Pilgrimage in both India and Tibet is probably the fundamental spiritual practice, which is something that is kind of lost in Western reception of South Asian spiritual traditions, especially Tibetan ones, but I think Indian as well. I'd like to talk more about that, but I don't think I have time. Something that is very important for most Indians on a day-to-day basis is their relationship with cults of local spirits, divinities that live in the very places where people are, that are associated with trees or river crossings, tirthas, etc. And then these local deities are brought into relationship with some of the sort of pan-Indian Brahminical deities we're familiar with, such as Shiva or Vishnu. So Indian spirituality indigenously involves that interplay of these pan-Indic sort of universal deities and the local forms. Now, the local forms include a whole bunch of different types of deities, such as yakshas, rakshasas, kimnaras, dakinis, grahanis, etc. And a lot of times these kinds of beings are actually pretty fearsome. They can be helpful or harmful, and many times quite harmful. So, for example, that beautiful constellation, the Pleiades, yeah, those seven. Those in one tradition are called the Saptamatrika, the seven mothers, which sounds friendly enough, except that these goddesses are known to steal children and make them sick and die. And so in local cults of these goddesses, people worship them and make offerings in order to placate them. And so one is in a relationship with a profound spiritual dimension, but it's not all just like chakras and light. There is an economy. There is an ecology to it. An eater and eaten kind of thing. Grahani is another one of these. The Caesars. They'll take your child right out of your womb. Right? These kinds of things. So this is an image of a yaksha shrine in Karnataka in South India. And this kind of thing turns out to be pretty important for Tantra. Let's move on. So yoginis and dakinis are going back a long time to sort of early medieval India, represent like I said, a class of these potentially helpful or harmful spirits. And they are known in some very early sources, which I can list for you if you'd like, as very dangerous kinds of beings that can come and suck the vitality out of you, maybe like a succubus or incubus or something like that. You would never, in your right mind, try to approach a yogini or dakini, okay? Anybody who does that is going to have to be extremely powerful and heroic, virile even. The very term vira is used, kind of like hero, for the kind of practitioner who would approach a being of this sort. I'll give you an example, and I'll try to explain why somebody would try to do something like this. I'll start with that, which is that these beings are in a position to grant one some power. The power of flight is one of the most common ones. You'll see a lot of images of flying dakinis. The Tibetan word is khandro, skygoer, for dakini. And by attaining a certain union or favor of dakinis, the yoga practitioner is able to attain flight. Okay, this is very important. This is what ends up being internalized as the rising of kundalini energy up the spine. So we're going to be talking about a process of a gradual internalization, sublimation, and philosophization, whatever, intellectualization of these traditions that are very pragmatic on the ground and kind of back alley, charnel ground black magic. Okay, so now. To give you an example of some of these early kinds of dakini practices, a practitioner might go into the forest in a kind of scary and dangerous place and invoke dakinis by drawing an image of a yantra. I'll show you a yantra in a minute, with his own blood, and writing the names of the various dakinis he wishes to invoke in his blood on this. And then here's where it gets interesting, then making an offering to these deities of each of the types of tissue named in the Indian medical text. So we've got skin, blood, fat, muscle, bone, semen, right? All these kinds of things. All of those parts of oneself. How do you harvest some bone to make an offering, right? This is not easy to do, but you would do this for days in a row out in the woods in a really scary place. And if you do it right, then a dakini will come into your presence and restore all of the parts of you that you have given to her and confer this power, and later confer a kind of spiritual or metaphysical insight. And so this is a tradition of making offerings to the deity or to the yogini, and the yogini is ingesting fluids, especially from the practitioners. Okay, and so this image here is interesting. We have Shiva here. It's hard to see, but on the left there in the center, there is a statue of Shiva, and then surrounded in a full ring is a whole set of yoginis, many of which will have animal heads, and they all have their different names and different potencies, and they're surrounding Shiva as aspects of his own power. So the practitioner, this would represent a later tradition in tantric practice, the traditioner would identify with Shiva, who is then in a position of power over the dakinis and yoginis, and can mobilize them at his will. Notice that this temple structure is open air, and you know why, right? Because we might just fly off into the sky if we do this right. Okay. Now I want to give you another sense for things here. Here's a dakini in a pretty cozy position. Why? Okay, so I talked about a kind of practice in which there's a transmission of bodily substance from the practitioner to the yogini. But then there is also a different kind of transmission. It's often called mouth to mouth. I can't remember the Sanskrit for that, but I can get it for you. Many of us are familiar with ear-to-ear kinds of transmission, the whispering of secrets from teacher to student in a kind of unbroken lineage. Well, we need to add to our lexicon here a term I got from David Gordon White down at UCSB, who wrote an amazing book called Kiss of the Yogini, Tantric Sex in its South Asian Context. Very important book. You got to read this if you're going to get into this stuff. Anyway, add to your lexicon this or your vocabulary this term fluid gnosis. Think about the way that rivers and goddesses, for example, are correlated in India. The Saraswati River is a river. It might be imaginary, actually, right? Maybe. Or maybe it used to exist, and then due to seismic changes, it no longer flows. But at any rate, we have a river who is also a goddess. And they're not they're not different. It's not a metaphor. The river is the goddess. So think about that. Think of a flowing liquidity, the Milky Way becoming the Ganges, a kind of homology of river and goddess, cosmos, spirit, etc. Now, a spiritual practitioner who wishes to enter in consciously to this tradition, which is the universe itself. I feel like Max was starting to make me think about the universe as philosophy itself, and that, which is a very tantric thing. In order to enter into that family, it's termed kula. Oh wow, I already have to wrap up. Jesus. In order to enter into that clan or family, one takes in the fluid that is given by those who hold this familial lineage, and you'll do that mouth to mouth. What is mouth, right? We think mouth to mouth is kissing, but in fact, mouth is often used as a term for the vagina and vulva and clitoris and all that. And the fluid gnosis, it represents a kind of sexually transmitted message, as David White calls it, which is the actual sexual fluids of a yogini. This time, she might be some visionary entity like a dakini. She might be a real person. The dakini, like the human spiritual being thing, is kind of vague. It could be a low-caste witch hanging around the graveyards that you have sex with in a pretty dangerous way, right? We're crossing caste boundaries. It's very transgressive. We're crossing disease vectors. It's a kind of a risky thing to do, but it bears great promise. By ingesting from her mouth, that is to say her yoni, her vagina, then these fluids initiate one. So you see these different ways of doing it. One offers one fluids to this entity, or one drinks fluids from the entity. And tantric initiation, oh, this is another latter day example of a dakini. You can see this, her name's Singhamukha. This is a Buddhist image. Quite powerful in a male version, Vajrapani. I'm totally out of time. I can't keep going. There's so much more to say, but here we are. I could keep talking if you want, but I'm also curious to hear where you want me to go with this and what's on your mind. We didn't talk much about the spiritual logic of late capitalism, did we? Tantra is a pretty huge subject. I'll just say something about mandalas. Tantra, in its fullest indigenous medieval context, makes sense in a kind of socio-political context that is monarchical, where the image of a mandala, and a lot of some of the early mentions of this term mandala, have to do with the way that a kingdom is seen from the perspective of the king, right? Making a wheel, sort of a chariot wheel for days around in a circle to kind of establish one's territory. Seated in the center of that, sovereign, containing all that's in it, powerful over all that's in it. That's the image of a mandala in its kind of political sense. Now, in fully developed medieval so-called high tantra, what you would have is the king identified with, say, Shiva, for example, enthroned at the center of the mandala, omnipotent within its horizon entirely, knowing everything that's in it, having power over all that's in it. And in the court of this king would be priests who initiate the king into this kind of tantric tradition. And then within this court, you would have your kind of scary Kapalika style, in other words, like skull cup carrying magicians and wizards who might act as spies or metaphysical soldiers for the court. This is the fullest context of Tantra. And when the wrong king is on the throne, or if there's no king at all, as in after, say, the 14th century, Muslims come in and totally change Indian society, and so we don't have the same models of kingship, then the Tantrika arrogates himself to the position of the throne. And we have a kind of imaginal mandala and a whole new expression of sovereignty. And so Tantra can represent a hegemonic political situation of the state spirituality, and it can also represent a kind of rebellion against that and an usurpation of sovereignty on the part of the practitioner and his followers. So I I wanted to give you some sense for these meanings of yogini, dakini, mandala, in order to show you some of the contrast between sort of indigenous, especially sort of called high Hindu Tantra of the medieval era, and Tantrism as it's marketed on websites like tantra.com, which, for a fee, can, through the internet, provide you with initiation. And furthermore, it's interesting. It's worth quoting something from page 226 of an important book I want to share with you. There's so many fun things I want to show you. Yeah, like this kind of thing. I thought this was kind of a sweet image, but also funny in just the way that it needs to be. Where is it? Sorry, everything was so organized before, and now it's just gone away. I had a really cool image, and now everything's totally messed up. It was really fun and cool, and I'm kind of upset that it's not here. But now we have Tantra as a highly capitalized, marketed sort of thing. It is kind of the perfect form of spirituality for consumer culture, insofar as it now is taken to be a kind of radical liberation of all desire, such that you can be a full-on consumer and be enlightened at the same time. The more spiritual you are, the more you deserve prosperity, for being wealthy is a function of enlightenment. Now, there's something to be said for that. I mean, there is a kind of critique going on of a certain form of Christian asceticism. But on the other hand, we can see, if we contrast Neo-Tantra, as we might call it, or California Tantra, as George Feuerstein calls it, with medieval Indian Tantra, we can see that we're not talking about the same thing anymore. And Tantra, as it's spoken about in the United States these days on this left coast, sometimes even on these very grounds, has a lot more to do with us, and it has a lot more to do with, again, late capitalism, than it has to do with indigenous India. So I just want to get you thinking about that, and I suppose this presentation is just the beginning of a conversation that I hope we can have for the rest of our lives. So thanks so much for listening. We have 3 entire minutes to talk further about this right now.
I see you for a moment and try to involve this with the internalization of the external practice.
Yeah, that is important, isn't it? Yeah, that's true. That's true. Hunter is referring to something that I think he'll share with us later in the week. So maybe I'll let you do it. Tantric philosophy, as I'm sure several of you are aware, can be pretty sublime and powerful. I mean, in living tantric traditions, say, for example, in Buddhism, it begins with a teacher who is highly accomplished in very subtle forms of meditation, helping you understand your highest potential, right? By directly pointing out the nature of mind in a way that is non-conceptual, entirely experienced, not symbolic, okay? So having nothing to do with images yet, but first to see that fresh, vast openness, which is and has always been and always will be your primordial nature, and in fact is also the primordial nature of all phenomena. And so this kind of very profound and very therapeutic philosophical context becomes what's really up with Tantra when you get to figures like Somananda or Abhinavagupta in the Hindu side, or Longchenpa, for example, on the Buddhist side. Go ahead.
So I'm wondering about the California version.
Yeah.
Assuming that Tantra is real,
Yeah.
are there penalties for misusing Tantra, as, for example, approaching the Dakini with great power?
Yeah.
You're likely to get in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
In your experience or expectation, is there a penalty for dumbing down emails or
Yeah.
versions
Yeah.
of Tantra?
Thanks for that. That's a very important difference between sort of medieval Tantra and contemporary sort of Neo-Tantra. Let's call it Neo-Tantra, because there are still living Tantric traditions, which are not Neo-Tantric. Nepal, for example, is a living Tantric kingdom. It still does the same kind of Tantric king initiation that I was referring to before. So yes, in the older context, Tantra is a very dangerous thing. You don't mess around with it. This is the reason why gurus are relevant. As I like to say, you don't learn brain surgery from books. You don't learn it by trial and error. You learn it from experts. And if you don't, then you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And that's what a guru is supposed to be, somebody who is a master of extremely subtle and potentially dangerous techniques. So to give you a quick answer from a Buddhist perspective, there's these beings called Chukyong, which would look a lot like Vajrapani. Wow, okay. You can tell I don't know how Macs work. No idea whatsoever. So this is interesting. I find this kind of neat. You'll have images. I've kind of quickly flashed through some pretty wrathful looking images, right? And those would look like these Dharmapalas, Chukyong, Dharma protectors. And what they would do is if you break tantric vows by pretending to be a guru, for example, which would be pretty close to what you're asking, then you might find yourself dying young or going insane. So that would be a very kind of scary and immediate image. But the way that protectors, according to Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who's an amazing teacher active right now, who you really should meet. He's quite a cool guy. Very PCC. I think you'd like him a lot. The way he talks about it is that Dharma protectors will let you think that you understand the tradition. And you'll think everything's going very well, and you'll just stay there. And that's it. And so you think you're doing fine, but in fact, you have never entered the tradition. So you're just spinning your wheels. And we don't have all day, so eventually you just die, and you've wasted your life. So that's also how Dharma protectors work. And Elizabeth tells me that we're done here. So we're going to have to continue this in the tubs, I think. Thank you.
On Thursday, I'll be going a little bit deeper into the philosophy and by Abhinav Gupta, the Hindu.
And I'll probably be heckling you, so be ready for that.